U.S. President Donald Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced the U.S. will soon begin construction of a missile defense system they say will be a next generation game changer, protecting the American homeland from outside adversaries. To talk about this and more is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, this system called Golden Dome is similar to the Iron Dome system already developed in Israel. What more can you tell us about this $175 billion system announced by the Trump administration?
Well, it promises to be bigger, better, and even more advanced technologically than the Iron Dome. And we already know that the Iron Dome does so much, and it has done so much in the past few years in protecting Israeli lives. And think about all the different fronts in which missiles are raining into Israel on a daily basis from the north, from the south, from Gaza, from the Houthis in Yemen. And it has done a phenomenal job at keeping Israelis safe. Now, Pete Hegseth is working together with Donald Trump to bring this to the United States. And obviously, the U.S. has collaborated with Israel in this endeavor. I actually, when I was in the Middle East about 8 years ago on a trip, I was able to visit the company that makes the Iron Dome. I got a full tour of it, understand how it works, was able to interview the creators of the Iron Dome. It is a fascinating, fascinating technological advancement in military the military missile defense, which is, a passive and easy way to keep the homeland safe. And that's exactly what Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth said in their briefing about this. So it's an exciting move forward for the United States. Yes.
Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei on Tuesday called U.S. demands that Tehran stop enriching uranium entirely, quote, utter nonsense, and questioned whether future nuclear talks could succeed. Lisa, is there any certainty at this point whether Iran wants to expand nuclear power or just enrich uranium to bolster its missile program?
Yeah, absolutely. They want to become a nuclear power and they will do whatever it takes. You know, what's ironic here is that the Iran regime wants this deal very, very badly. They need it in order to get the sanctions removed, the maximum pressure campaign. I mean, this is a multi-pronged a political warfare campaign against Iran's regime that the Trump administration brought back in their second term. If you recall, in the first term, the Trump administration had this maximum pressure campaign, which really bankrupted the mullahs in the sense that they could not fund these terror proxies. They couldn't get money to Hezbollah and Hamas. They couldn't get money to the Houthis in Yemen. They couldn't carry on their insurgencies because they weren't able to sell oil. Now, under the Biden administration, they raked in north of $100 billion in oil sales because those sanctions were removed, and they had the breathing space, not only to sell oil, not only to rake in money from their banking system, but also to continue with their weapons program. The deal that was in place, Donald Trump said that was just toilet paper. He wanted to rip it up. That's what he campaigned on. And that's why in May of 2018, he pulled out of that deal. And now he's trying to get back into another deal. But what kind of a deal? What he calls a good deal. And what does that entail? Full surrender of their nuclear program. And now the mullahs, while they want the deal, this is the chest thumping that they always do. This is the bluffing. This is the rhetoric that they use in order to say, you know what, we have the upper hand, we have the leverage, and we're not going to take a bad deal. It's interesting. I don't think the Trump administration will take anything less than full surrender. But again, at the same time, the one thing that I do think is great about the approach is that it's multi-pronged. They're using multiple statecraft tools to bring the Iran regime to the negotiating table, and those sanctions will remain in place until the Trump administration does get some sort of concessions from the mullahs.
Special Envoy for Hostage Response Adam Bowler responded to a Washington Post reports that claimed President Donald Trump threatened to abandon Israel unless the war ended as fake news. He adds that a hostage deal is nearing. How close are we to a hostage deal?
You know, it's very difficult to say how close we are to a hostage deal. The fact that there are still hostages is mind-blowing. The fact that the international community has not been successful in demanding the release of innocent hostages more than a year and a half into this horrific terror attack on Israel and its civilians is just mind-boggling. We did just get that one American, Edon Alexander, back with Donald Trump's negotiations through Qatar and Hamas. That just goes to show that if we do want to, we could push Qatar's hand to release the rest of the hostages and to really strong arm Hamas to release the rest of those hostages. So we appreciate the fact that we're going back to the negotiating table, but really there should be more pressure on Hamas to release the hostages than there is pressure on Israel to end this war. They would end this war if the Hamas would release the hostages, and it's as easy as that. So that's the priority in this war, to get the hostages released, to get rid of Hamas, and then to find a way forward for both the Palestinian and the Israeli people to live side by side with stability, with peace, and then hopefully prosperity for years to come.
Now, Lisa, the Associated Press is reporting that thousands of children are at risk of acute malnutrition after Israel sealed the Gaza Strip off from all imports for more than 2.5 months. Canada, France, and the UK are threatening actions against Israel. And on the other hand, Israel is fighting against a terrorist group that wants to end it. War is an adult act, but it's the kids that are paying the price. What are your thoughts?
The kids are paying the price because they are living under the leadership of a terror organization. The Palestinian children have not just been suffering for a year and a half, they have been suffering all their lives. Why? Because they've always been led by terrorists who were voted into office. Now, whether it was a paragraph, whether they were voted, whether it was a real election, whether it was a false election, the fact is they're living under a terror organization at their helm, A. B, the aid that's going into Gaza is not getting to the Palestinian people. It is being hoarded by Hamas. When Hamas is under pressure, what do? They take whatever is given to them. If the UN, if the international community, if Israel allows that aid to go in, it's not getting to the people. And if you've seen images of those trucks coming in and the Palestinian people just bum rushing the trucks and then being shot at because Hamas won't allow that. But look how badly they want that aid, but it's not getting to them. It's interesting because Hamas just recently, in the last 24 hours, rejected another ceasefire deal, and a lot of people are pointing to the fact that the Europeans and the Canadians coming out with this kind of condemnation against Israel really emboldened Hamas to say no to another ceasefire deal. Had the international community stood by Israel and said, we will not tolerate terrorism, we will not tolerate terrorism against the Palestinian people by Hamas, and we won't tolerate terrorism against the Israelis by Hamas. There has to be a unified voice internationally going forward to get the hostages back and to end terror in the region. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing this wishy-washy, really liberal thinking that says Israel's wrong for fighting a war to get back its civilians. What country would be condemned for wanting to get back innocent civilians that are being held hostage and pawns in this war? So, I mean, there's so much to say here, but really, I think Canada, the UK, France, they really need to reflect upon this statement and how much it emboldens these terrorists in the region and how much it will have an effect on them. If you go to the UK today, if you go to Canada, which you are in Canada, if you go to France today, you will see how emboldened these radicalized elements, even that have gotten into these societies, have become. And once you realize that, you realize that we are all at risk of these lone wolf type attacks. Even in the United States, they come in through our southern border. They come in through our southern border and they go north to Canada as well. So, I mean, until the world understands this threat, and it's not just in the Middle East, it's an ideological threat. It's spreading. These migrants bring this threat. There are elements of Hamas and of the Taliban, of Iran's regime that have come through our southern border. We know that. The FBI has reported on that. It's not a joke. And it's not just Israel's war to fight. This is the fight for civilization. It's the fight for the West. It's the fight for our futures. And I think people have to wake up.
It's been reported that U.S. President Donald Trump talked with Russian leader Vladimir Putin for 2 hours, and now the U.S. is waiting for Putin's ceasefire proposal. I think the question remains, though, does Putin really want peace?
Well, if you ask Donald Trump, he thinks that Putin does want peace. He said, I think he's had enough of this war and he actually does want an off ramp. Look, logic would dictate that he would want an end to this bloody war because it hasn't been an easy one for Russia as well. They've had many casualties. Obviously, the Russian people are very disillusioned with their leadership. They're very much, they don't want this war. And of course, the Ukrainian people being, of course, invaded and moving all over the world and throughout Europe, and really all the casualties we've seen on both sides in this war. So yes, logic would dictate he wants an off ramp, but he's not a logical character. He is a dictator, and he's a brutal one. So the fact that he now has homework to come up with a proposal, we shall see. We shall see what he comes up with, and if Donald Trump is in fact right, if he read the room properly, and that Putin really does want that off ramp and he wants this war to end. The fact that Donald Trump is giving him a chance to come up with his own idea of what a ceasefire would look like is actually a great idea. You're really putting him on the spot. If you want this to end, what would it look like to you? You come to us, we'll see what that looks like to you, and we'll start there. We'll start there, and we'll start the compromise. So I think it's a good starting place, and we'll see. I think Marco Rubio was spot on when he said we can't just keep continuing to have talks about having talks. We have to see some action. We have to see progress, and we have to have some sort of solution to this awful and senseless war.
Now, Lisa, over the weekend, we saw horrific visuals of a Mexican tall ship drift into New York's Brooklyn Bridge, leaving some of the ship's crew dangling from the destroyed mast, holding on for dear life from plunging into the river to their death. Now, what's the latest on the Mexican naval ship Cuauhtemoc? I heard last I heard, 2 people were dead, 20 are injured, and there's an investigation going on.
That's right. Those are the numbers, and that is what I am hearing as well. If you're able to catch the video, it's almost, for these individuals who lost their lives or were even injured, to see that happening in slow motion as you are approaching a bridge, horrific, horrific. And you can see from so many videos or different angles that people were able to capture this while at the same time running because they didn't realize how much of the debris would be flying or if they would be in harm's way. So you're watching people who are bystanders, their faces and their reaction to watching these people, just as you said, dangling or falling to their death. It was absolutely horrific. And hopefully the investigation will tell us more. I mean, why didn't they have the right information about clearing that bridge? How did this happen? And hopefully there will be intel enough to prevent this from ever happening again. And hopefully the families of the victims can get some answers as well.
Yeah, very, very sad. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.